Hello and welcome to a Preschool Distance Learning Toolkit for Caregivers, Volume 1. Alternatively named Instructions for the Weird Life, which is what my 7-year-old thought I should call this presentation. First of all, I need to tell you something. Congratulations. Because you are currently achieving something that's practically impossible and that none of us ever dreamed we would be doing. Oh, but seriously. Who signed up for this? No one. And yet, somehow, we are doing it. So a giant virtual high five is coming your way for that mere fact. Boom. All right, what are our objectives? What I'm hoping you'll get from this presentation is an understanding of the concept of shaping and how it can enhance your child's progress while maintaining your sanity. An awareness of the most commonly observed environmental variables in home settings, and ideas to help you feel informed about making decisions related to implementation of distance learning in your home for your preschooler. Who's number one? Your teacher. Your teacher is your number one source of information and direction. What we talk about today is generic, and it's related to what we know about best practices and based on what we're all experiencing in live instruction on Zoom and Google Meet platforms. There's a disclaimer. You're about to hear things that are intended to make your life easier, not harder, in the long run. Give yourself grace and patience. Ask for help. Forgive yourself. But please, families, keep trying. We're going to get through this. The first thing I want to talk about briefly is a concept called shaping. The technical definition of shaping as a strategy is reinforcing successive approximations, which is a really lovely behavior analytic definition of that. In real people language, you might think of shaping as focusing on the little victories your child experiences on the way to the end game. I'm going to be using that term frequently throughout this presentation to remind us what we're striving for. This strategy applies to almost everything we do in early childhood special education because we're dealing with little children, and we're dealing with little children with disabilities who don't know how to do a lot of things at all. And so shaping is the best strategy we can think about using across all areas when we're teaching them. I liken it to building a wall one brick at a time. So each brick represents a piece of a skill or a step towards the end result, which in this analogy is a wall. When I say the end game, what I mean is it's like the strong and solid wall built over time through patience and intention. Every child's wall looks different and takes a different length of time to build, but you'll get there eventually. You keep trying one brick at a time, and some walls may be one brick high, and that's their goal, and that's their outcome, and that's okay. Some may build castles, and that's okay too. When you're thinking about your own child, I welcome you to think about their IEP goals. That's what drives us in education. That's what keeps us moving towards a common purpose. You should consider what's developmentally appropriate for your child based on their age and their ability. And if you don't know what that is, ask your teacher. They know all of the things. For example, you might have a 4-year-old who's more at a 2-year-old level in certain areas. Maybe they're not potty trained because they're just not ready yet, and that's okay. So that's what we mean by ability and developmental level. Unfortunately, we do have to think about what a typical school setting looks like, as well as how society expects children to learn. And as much as we know it's not the best way to do things for all children, there are certain norms and rules that we have to follow in society, and school is the first place that kids are exposed to that type of life. So though that's a long ways down the road for our preschoolers, it's never too soon to start thinking about that as where we're going. And just to help you guys out, I really would like you to consider the skills and the scenarios that will make you and your child's life easier in the long run. What's going to matter most in your home and in your family and in your life for your child to be able to do? And maybe that's the priority. Maybe that's your ultimate end game. So we're first going to talk about factors in the physical environment during live instruction. So the focus today is talking about all the things related to live instruction. So you're spending lots of time doing lots of other things. But what surrounds today's discussion is about the live instruction component. So that means when you log on to Zoom and you got the teacher and they're doing their thing and you have your child and you're trying to get them to look at the screen and participate. So that's the type of scenario we're talking about today specifically, also called synchronous learning. So the factors that I think are most salient are schedules, seating, snacks and food, screen positioning, siblings, materials, and the different ways we can use screen views and audio settings to get through all of those. The role of the caregiver, that's you. First of all, I'm proud of you for being here and for watching this video and for making it this far into the video. I'd like you to keep watching if you possibly can, or maybe come back to it later if you're already feeling overwhelmed. That's okay. Considerations. So I think we all know that the end game is learning of skills. We're all in this to educate the children in all the areas where they need educating. And for preschoolers, it's basically everything. They're not expected to know a whole lot of things, and even more challenged in ways where there's a disability involved. And so your role becomes the supporter of all of the learning in the home. So one of the main things to think about in that role is how much prompting does your child need versus being able to do something independently. And this isn't me telling you what to do, this is me telling you to think about what you're doing. And to recognize that the goal of this work is for the kids to do things by themselves and independently. And in school, sometimes we tend to over-prompt, meaning we assume they're going to need help. And we help them before they even showed us they needed help, and that is not a good thing. So I encourage you to allow your child opportunities to respond prior to helping them, just so you can see kind of if they start going the right direction on their own, and then you can prompt them if they need it afterwards. In order to prompt or help the child, you have to consider your proximity to the child. I think for preschool aged children, the expectation would be that you'd be close by, possibly sitting at the table or next to them, positioned so that you can do things on the actual computer if required, or help physically support them sitting or pointing or whatever it is they're being asked to do. So being close by is pretty helpful in this stage of life and learning. One thing to be aware of is responding for the child. So one thing that's super important to teachers is that they are hearing and seeing the child's responses, not yours. We love parents being on the call and singing and modeling, but please be aware that it's most important for the teachers to hear what the child is going to say or do, or what sounds they're making, even if they're not real words. It's all really helpful and important. So just keep that in mind. Also, we get very anxious as parents to share that we know our child knows the answer and to then jump in and answer it ourselves. And it's important to not do that unless the teacher's asking you to. Model it or tell you the answer yourself, which is also a thing that can happen. We also enjoy naturally occurring opportunities. So, for example, if your child is having a tantrum and, you know, it's hard and it's, you know, not your favorite thing to deal with, that's okay. What is helpful is for the teacher to see how that looks and what happens. So don't ever think that what's happening in your house is not useful, right? It's all relevant for preschool age children, and the teachers want to see all of it, okay? And I'm sure you all feel sufficiently like personal assistants to your children right now. But you do obviously have to be the one to help take care of their basic needs. And having basic needs met sometimes your biggest accomplishment of the day, and that's all right too. Schedules. So when thinking about schedules, the end game here is predictability and consistency. And I think we all know that we live in a society that's pretty heavily scheduled. And being able to stick to a schedule is kind of an important skill. And we all have to do that as much as we may want to resist it sometimes, especially in school. Keeping a routine is good for everyone. I think particularly for our kids on the autism spectrum, we find that we can capitalize on the need for sameness by giving them a routine, and it makes the day-to-day stuff kind of easier. But also using a schedule strategically if something's going to be different, so they understand, oh, that's going to be different today, and then they know that it's coming. I would also suggest building your schedule around school during school time, so that you have your Zoom meetings built in, and then you have snack time built in, and then you have some play time or independent time if that's a thing for you, and then maybe you have some asynchronous learning time on Seesaw, and try to kind of keep it predictable and keep it the same. Some teachers will have given you sample schedules. I encourage you to use those as a baseline, and then take it where it needs to go for you and for your child. I have become very accustomed to using my Apple Watch to set alarms, to remind myself to do things, or to log on to meetings, or to leave to go places. And that can be a really helpful tool, especially when you are dealing with multiple children and working from home and getting caught up in all of the things. It's okay to rely on other supports for yourself to manage, like make it easier. And then visual supports, I mean, we all use visual supports. We have to-do lists, and we have our calendars and our phones. Everyone uses them, and they're especially helpful for kids who don't read yet, or who rely heavily on the visual rather than the auditory to understand what's going on. So this is an example of a schedule that you might get from your teacher. So this is the circle time schedule. So she might send you a copy, laminated, whiteboard marker, or whatever, and you can reuse it if the schedule is kind of the same every time. One big thing that comes up is seating arrangements and discussions around whether we're sitting, whether we're standing, whether we're running away, what type of chair are we in, and so there's a lot to think about. End game wise, though, in school, most of the time there's an expectation that the child will sit independently in a chair. This is definitely a skill we spend a lot of time working on at school. But, you know, we don't have high chairs at school. We try to avoid having kids restrained unnecessarily at school. What you choose to do in your home is an entirely different matter. But I'm here to just share where we're headed to have our children be functional, independent at school when the time comes. So taking steps towards that is what I want you to start thinking about, wrapping your head around what it would feel like to take the next step towards independence sitting in a chair. What does that even mean? One strategy is offering choices. You know, some kids are working better when they're sitting on their bed rather than at a table, especially if you don't have like a little tiny table that's the right size for your child, which is another challenge at home. That's fine, you know, or you have a child that actually attends to instruction better when they're walking around. Just make sure they're in proximity to the device so that they continue hearing and seeing and can be responsive if called upon. So thinking about that is important too. Oh, well, like I just said that. And it's up to you and your child and your teacher what the expectations are, right? But we do know that it's not really commonly accepted long-term in a school setting to walk around a classroom during instruction. So it's just something to think about. Also thinking about age and developmental appropriateness for your child, and that matters a lot. So your child may not be ready to sit in a normal sized chair, and maybe you don't have a tiny chair for them to sit in. So the high chair is the chair that's appropriate for their size that you have in your house. So thinking about that, but then also thinking about what steps can we take away from having the child locked into the high chair, so that they start understanding that I can sit in a chair and I'm going to stay there even without the tray in front of me. Just a thought. I don't know about your guys' houses, but mine is a disaster. That's not my house in the picture, but it might as well be. That by the end of the day, my children have pretty much ravaged the room where they do their schooling. And I think the critical thing for us as parents dealing with little kids is understanding how to organize yourself so you can find what you need when you need it, which is tricky. One parent referenced the pre-Zoom scramble. She said the pre-Zoom scramble is real. And that's the thing where you have stacks of stuff everywhere and you don't know what you're going to need for that circle time or that meeting, and you are scrambling right before it starts to try to find the thing. So finding ways to organize so that you don't have to do that is maybe another helpful step. And probably a lot of you have already figured this out, but if you haven't, or you're just now starting to feel like you've accumulated so many things that you need to start organizing them, which may be the case 7 weeks in. Some ideas: folders, shoe boxes, Safeway bags, envelopes, binders, sheet protectors, bookshelves, drawers, tubs, bins, all the things. And if you are like me and you love the Container Store, they have a really great online ordering system, and then you just go and you pick it up outside, and it's great. And if you need support on any of this, please talk to your teacher. They can help you understand maybe the best strategy on how to organize the things, if it's by week or by content area or by type of material or by this is for circle time, this is for other things. Let your teacher tell you that. I certainly don't know. I think one of the biggest challenges of this whole entire situation is when you have multiple children that all need things from you at the same time. Never mind you're trying to work from home or, do dishes or cook food for people at the same time as doing all of the things. We get it. We know. We are also doing it. Many of us. And the end game on this is you need help. So I wish that I could come to your house and help you. I genuinely do. I know many of us feel that way. But we can't yet. So if you do have other children around, if it's a little pod happening or siblings, think about, are these children helping me with the situation with my preschooler, or are they making it worse somehow? Thinking about the fact that the siblings or those other children are the peers to your child right now. Normally they'd be at school and their peers would be at school with them, or maybe a private preschool opportunity that's not happening at the moment. But if there's siblings or other kids there and you have goals for your child to interact with other children, that is what you've got to work with. Similarly, you can view the siblings or other children as models for your child. If you have a child who's really good at something, really good at cutting, then have that child sit with your child and model how to do the cutting activity with them. And then if you have older children or kids who just love to help, use them. It's very, educationally speaking, worthwhile to have children spend time teaching other children. And it may be different if they're siblings, but it doesn't hurt to try or set up scenarios where that could be useful to you. And thinking about the scenarios where just having your other children or the other kids occupied doing whatever so that you can focus on your preschooler during the times when they need you most, and not having to split your attention between kids if that's possible for you. So the goal of the conversations around devices and technology is to maximize access. And I mean access in terms of your child's access to instruction and to activities, as well as the teacher's access to seeing and hearing your child, because this is all we get right now to learn who your child is and what they're able to do or what they need help with. And it all depends on the technology kind of being there. So just some considerations, right? So would you want to have your technology in reach or out of reach of your child? I think that depends entirely on whether they're going to reach out and grab it. And if that's a bad thing. If you have a child that can engage with it appropriately, it's probably best to let them try, and you just have to be there close by to prompt them to do it appropriately. If the child gets up and goes from wherever they are, and you can, take the device with you. So we've had parents following their kid around all around the living room, just so that they maintain the image and the teacher's presence with the child. Good for you. I had a parent move the device down to under the table where the child was. And, you know, fine, whatever works, honestly, is kind of a good motto these days. The objective here is that they learn they're not going to escape from the session by running away. And that'll be like a whole nother training topic that we'll do, because that's a big one. Thinking about whether your device is handheld or if there's a way to rest it on a surface, and kind of what that means for your positioning and your involvement. And then thinking about the angle of the camera or the screen, because sometimes teachers would rather see the child's hands. And like an OT would certainly like to see the child's hands. And then they may tell you to shift the angle. So that's just something to be aware of. Obviously, if the child is talking, they'll want to see their mouth moving. Along the same lines here with access, talking about the screen view and audio considerations. So when I surveyed my teachers, most of them didn't have a specific preference in terms of gallery versus speaker view. And I think the message is that it's good to have a choice, and it depends on the child. So I know some children become overwhelmed or overstimulated by looking at the gallery view. And so if that's your child, then you would probably prefer speaker view. Or if the teacher is doing something important, speaker view or pinning their video may be useful so that you can see it better because it'll be bigger. That's more just considerations. Using volume strategically, if your child has challenges with auditory stimulation and something is loud or chaotic sounding to them, turn the volume down. It's okay to do that, and then gradually turn it back up when things calm down or as they get used to it. You may also consider using headphones or earbuds or having external speakers, depending on what type of device you have. A lot of our teachers have those nifty headsets with a little microphone so that they can hear and be heard very clearly. And we don't expect you guys to have that, but it does make a huge difference if you can hear the detail that's coming from the teacher. If you have your child on headphones, but you still need to hear what's happening, you can get what's called a splitter. And it's like a little plug that turns one plug into two plugs. And then you can plug it in your headphones too and hear what the child is hearing with better sound quality. And of course, the infamous mute button, being sure to monitor whether your child should be on mute or not. And the teachers should be sharing their expectations around that. And it will be relatively obvious during certain times of circle whether they should be muted or not. It's another reason for you to be in close proximity, because we don't expect preschoolers in general to know how to mute and unmute themselves. It's something that the kindergarten teachers spend a lot of time on. It's a game changer. So in terms of snacks and food, so we do see a lot of kids, because kids eat constantly. I know this, I realize this, but when they're at school, they don't. They're not, like, it's just not what we do, unless there's certain situations, obviously. So what we're striving for, the end game long term down the road, is that eating is more confined or more defined. But if your child is the one that will not sit at all or do anything focused unless the food is happening, that's okay. That's called pairing, and it's a good strategy. So you're pairing the presence of food with the expectation to sit and look at the screen, and that's okay to do. But you've got to attend to how they're doing and fade the food out, right? Which means, you know, give them less and or then intermittently provide little bits of food as they stay seated rather than having like a whole meal while they're sitting. And then there are some teachers, which is such a great idea, to like have snack time on camera. You know, it's a great social opportunity. It's a very natural opportunity for staff to see how they're manipulating utensils, for OTs to see how their grasps are looking. So if it's the activity, then of course you're gonna have the food prepared. And the intent is, if they're engaged in live instruction and expected to verbally respond, we just wanna make sure that the food isn't kind of interfering with the opportunity for the teacher to see what they can do. Wow, we've reached the end of this. So as I put this together, I kept thinking of other things that I wanted to tell you. And then I thought, this is going to be too long. So I'm planning to put together more of these if people have interest. And these are the topics that came to mind. Escape extinction is one concept that is pretty pertinent to little children. We started talking today about prompting. There's a lot more we can talk about with that, and that's pretty useful. Some of you guys may be interested in hearing more about managing problem behavior, tantrums, aggression, self-injury, things that might be happening for you at home that we're usually well equipped to deal with at school, but we'd like to be able to support that at home too. And then it's called functional communication training, which is a broad topic, just to really start to understand how we can increase the use of language and communication. So if you have other ideas or needs for training or discussion or tools, put it in the chat or in the comments of the video. And thank you very much.